Hello and welcome to this Ingenta webinar on archiving your valued content with Portico. Ingenta produce numerous products for publishers, including content discovery and delivery platforms like Ingenta Edify, Ingenta Connect Unity, Ingenta Connect, and Ingenta Open. These products help get your content discovered, and if you wish to learn more about these, please get in contact with Ingenta to learn more. In this webinar, Stephanie Orphan, Director of Publisher Relations, will talk about preservation and Portico, a service which provides libraries and publishers with reliable, cost-effective preservation of electronic resources and contributes expertise and technical assistance to national libraries, including the British Library. Ingenta Connect can also automatically feed its publishers' content to the service. Portico's e-journal and e-book preservation service operate in a way in which both publishers and libraries help to defray the ongoing costs of operating the archive. Stephanie is responsible for maintaining and expanding publisher participation in the Portico preservation service to ensure ongoing growth and sustainability of the Portico archive. She's also currently serving on the board of directors of Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association, OASPA, and brings a strong understanding of publishing platforms, metadata, and packaging formats to her role. I will now pass you over to Stephanie. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today to learn more about Portico and digital preservation. To give you a very high-level view of what Portico is doing and committed to doing, we are committed to the preservation of scholarly literature published in electronic form to ensure that these materials remain accessible for future generations of scholars, researchers, and students. We are part of Ithaca, which is also the parent organization of ArtStore, Ithaca S&R, and JSTOR. As an organization, collectively, these services have been heavily engaged in the print to digital transition. To go a little bit more deeper into what exactly it is Portico does, we're a digital preservation service for e-journals, e-books, and other scholarly electronic content. Our e-journal service is our flagship preservation service. It's what we started out with, and it is our biggest service at this time in terms of amount of content preserved and publishers participating. We actually began as a project within JSTOR in the early 2000s, and then were rolled out by JSTOR with funding from the Library of Congress and the Andrew Mellon Foundation in 2005 as a functioning preservation service. Digital preservation emerged as a solution to issues that have been raised by the transition from print to digital content, ensuring that libraries can be confident that they will have ongoing access to materials that they purchase when it's in electronic form, and they're not keeping copies themselves within the library as they are able to do with print content. We are a collaboration between libraries and publishers. We have participation on both sides. Both libraries and publishers contribute financially to Portico, and publishers, of course, are providing us with their content. Content is received directly from publishers. We do a number of things to it, which I will get into a little more detail about later on, and we hold this content in a dark archive. This means that our primary concern is with the ongoing curation and care of the content, with access sort of being a secondary function. We're really concerned with making sure the content remains usable so that if a specific event occurs that causes us to have to make the content available, we're able to do this. We do view ourselves largely as access of the last resort. We will offer access to content in a trigger event scenario, which is when content is no longer available online. And there are also perpetual access, post-cancellation access options with Portico, which I will also talk about a little bit more in detail later. Portico was the first digital preservation service to be audited and certified as a trustworthy digital repository by the Center for Research Libraries, which is a fairly lengthy process where they're really looking under the hood and confirming that we're doing what we're saying we're doing and are a trustworthy place for libraries and publishers to rely on. So why digital preservation? I spoke of this briefly in that, you know, there's a concern that libraries no longer have control of content if they're subscribing electronically or purchasing and accessing specifically electronically. So digital preservation allows them to secure their investment in their e-resources, which is a growing expenditure for libraries. It also can help them make decisions to stop spending on dual formats. If they know that digital content is being preserved, they have less of a reason to also get a print version that they can maintain within the library. They can rely on the fact that if they go e-only, a digital preservation service is preserving that content. And it fulfills a shared responsibility, which is a core responsibility of libraries to ensure the future access to content for future generations. And why use a third party? Well, digital preservation is pretty complicated. It takes a lot of infrastructure, it takes time, it takes expertise. Doing this on an individual basis would be very difficult and time consuming, and in the cases of libraries could take away from some of their other primary duties that they need to be performing and have high interest in doing for their communities. Handling preservation is a third-party activity between libraries and publishers and third-party organizations such as Portico is the most cost-effective and really makes the most sense compared to publishers trying to do something or individuals, libraries trying to do something. Portico offers 3 preservation services. Our e-journal and ebook preservation services are on a community model. That means that both libraries and publishers are supporting these services. Publishers pay an annual archive support fee that is tiered based on their revenue, and libraries pay an annual archive support fee that is tiered based on their library's materials expenditures. We also have a decollections preservation service, which primarily is used to preserve large digitized collections of primary source materials. This service is on a fee-for-service model where the publisher pays the full cost of preservation and libraries are entitled to access to the content in a trigger event scenario if they were a customer of the publisher. On the e-journal and e-book side, for content that was previously subscribed to, libraries have to participate in Portico to get any access to that content. For open access content, we provide access openly if there's a trigger event. But if it was content that used to have to be paid for before it triggered, you need to be a Portico participant for ebooks and e-journals. For decollections, it's based on being a customer of the publisher in question. So we currently have a global library participation of 1,033 participating libraries. That's split roughly, I believe, 50-50 between the United States and international. And we have a number of international consortia that participate in Portico. And this representation is from 22 countries. Global publisher participation is 625 participating content providers in 61 countries. We have agreements with 625 entities, but this represents content from more than 2,000 publishing entities, simply due to many small publishers having their publishing arrangements through larger entities. And so Portico is getting content for many of these smaller publishers through their relationships with larger publishers like Wiley and Sage, or through arrangements we have with Digital Commons to preserve the content in their publishing program. Just to take a little bit of a deeper dive into publisher participation at Portico. As I mentioned previously, the eJournal service is our biggest service. We have 486 publishers participating in the eJournal preservation service. So far this year in 2019, I've signed 19 additional agreements to this service. So it's a relatively high growth area still, even this far in. 196 of these publishers have at least some OA titles and are on an agreement that ensures that their content will remain open access should there be a trigger event. From 2015 to 2019, the majority of signings to the Portico eJournal service has been small publishers and primarily small OA publishers. And we tend to characterize a small publisher as a publisher with between 1 and 5 titles. And the majority of these are single title publishers. There are 176 publishers participating in our ebook preservation service. We also have OA publishers and are able to do OA trigger events on ebook content. Increasingly, we are seeing as a trend that publishers are also committing some non-standard content to the ebook service. So things like reference works and database content, less traditional than just a PDF or EPUB of a book. The decollection service, we currently have 5 publishers participating. Plus, we are also preserving the Crossref metadata database, and they're loosely in this service just because it's the best fit for them compared to eJournals or ebooks. 221 collections have been committed to Portico for preservation in the decollections preservation service. And we are always seeing new interest from smaller players whose primary business may just be having 1 or 2 small niche collections, and also seeing that traditional publishers that have been more familiar to us in the eJournal and ebook space are launching primary source collections and looking to have them preserved as well. So how does Portico work? We are a centralized and replicated repository, and we use migration as our primary long-term archival approach to preservation, and we have a managed preservation strategy. We have a definition for preservation, which is that it is a fully managed preservation is the series of policies and activities necessary to ensure the usability, authenticity, discoverability, and accessibility of content over the very long term. Some activities that we undertake to ensure that we're living up to this definition is our format-based migration strategy. We gather and preserve preservation metadata, so it's tracking any time we're touching the content, anytime we do checksums and are doing other confirmations of content in the archive, everything is being tracked in the preservation metadata. We have a practical approach to preservation. We do things that are going to make the most sense to allow for the future usability and discoverability of the content by end users. The archive is self-describing. It's in a file format that is not reliant on the current technology. So down the road, if there's a different way of different technology for reading content, this file format would be able to be exported and understood using any kind of a system. We're a dark archive with audit access. So I described briefly that a dark archive means we're, primarily concerned with the care of the content. We do allow publishers and participating publishers and libraries to review content in an audit interface so that they can ensure that things look accurate and that we're doing what we said we were going to do. The archive is not static. We will migrate content. If we figure out different ways of doing things, we will rerun content to add new metadata and update our practices to make sure that we are handling content the best way to handle it for the time at hand. So this slide is basically just showing a little bit of what was already described, that there's many levels of content management. At the lowest level is just sheer backup, which is always good to do, but not preservation. Some places will say that they're byte replicating their content, and that's also a good practice, but it's not preservation. Portico is operating at the very far end of the scale. Everything that I've been describing is for fully managed preservation activities. So part of this, the process that Portico does to ensure the ongoing accessibility is that prior to ingesting content into the archive, we already do 2 transformations of content. The first is that we transform the supplied metadata from the publisher into the Portico metadata, which is based on JATs for journals and bits for books. We also do a repackaging of the content to meet Portico's content model for digital preservation. After the content is in the archive, we do have a number of activities that go on. A lot of the upfront work, it's easy to get focused on a lot of the upfront work, the activities and writing the tools to get the content into the archive. But really the most important things are the things that we're doing after the content has been ingested into the archive. And that we're doing to make sure that it remains viable for the future. We have a replication strategy, so the archive is replicated in multiple places. We perform fixity checks. We repair and replace content. If it becomes corrupted, we will deduplicate the archive. As I mentioned, we have the audit site for review. We provide reports to our participants out on the content. We will refresh hardware on a regular schedule according to best practices. And of course, we monitor the preservation and academic community for changes in preservation needs. And as needed, we will validate and revalidate files and tools. When tools are developed, we will migrate files to new formats when necessary. We update our preservation plans when needed and receive preservation accreditation. As mentioned, we are have been certified as a trustworthy digital repository by the Center for Research Libraries. So we have a replication strategy, as I mentioned. The primary master of the Portico archive is located in the East Coast of the United States. Upon ingest, content is immediately replicated to servers in the Midwest. For journal and book content, content is also then going to an online replica that is located in the Dutch National Library. And for our decollections content, the second copy of the content is going into commercial cloud storage that is located in the United States. So the nuts and bolts of participation in Portico from a publisher's perspective is what I'm going to talk a little bit about next. This is the general process for participating in Portico as a journal and book publisher. The steps for decollection publishers are very similar, but they are a little bit more complicated. So I'm not going to go into detail about the decollections. So publishers, prior to signing an agreement with Portico, we need to make sure that they're able to provide content to us in a package and format that we can work with. So for most publishers, this means that we will review sample content prior to signing, and we need to approve the content before signing. And if it's originally not meeting our standards, we work with the publisher to get to the point where they can provide us with an export that meets our spec. We will forego the content review process for publishers that are coming from a known platform. As was mentioned, Ingenta Connect is a platform that Portico has a lot of experience working with. So if you're a publisher on Ingenta Connect, we can just move forward with signing the agreement without reviewing any sample content. This is the same for many of the other commercial platforms. Once the content has been approved, publishers just need to review and sign the Portico license agreement. When they do this, a piece of this is providing us with a list of titles and their identifiers. And then also they can sign the perpetual access rider if desired. This is not mandatory. Publishers who sign the Perpetual Access Rider are providing Portico with the ability to honor claims for ongoing access to content from former subscribers or purchasers of the publisher who were entitled to perpetual access and who are also Portico participants. After the agreement has been signed, publishers just need to make arrangements to deposit content to Portico. This is primarily made via FTP deposit, although we are open to fetching from a publisher's FTP or other sources such as an API if it's works with our system. Publishers then make an annual financial contribution to help Portico support our preservation activities. As I mentioned, these are tiered based on total journal or ebook revenues, depending on the service. For our ebook preservation service, there is also a one-time setup fee to defray the cost of tool development. Portico is dedicated to removing obstacles for small publishers. So as I mentioned, if you're not on one of these pre-approved platforms, we do need to review sample content to ensure that we can work with content that you're able to deliver content to us in a way that we can work with. But we also do look to minimize the technical barrier to entry for publishers, particularly smaller publishers that maybe are just new to the space and have just trying to get their journal out and may not have the technical expertise as some of the larger publishers. One way in which we've removed some of these obstacles is by working with PKP to develop an OJS export plugin specifically for publishers on the OJS platform. This allows them to just use the plugin, and we're guaranteed that the content that comes to us will be formatted and packaged as we need it to be. For publishers that have difficulty exporting metadata from their system or maybe don't even know exactly what we mean by metadata, we do have an option where they can provide that metadata by spreadsheet, and we will convert that into XML. Some publishers are using a database to export content and there is no DTD. We will create a DTD that is able to validate the content in the format that they provided. So we also, as I kind of alluded earlier, are committed to flexibility in terms of how we'll get your content from us. If we need to, we will download content on a limited basis. We'll experiment with crawling and work with publishers closely to make sure that we can mutually agree on a way to get the content to Portico that benefits both of us and isn't too difficult on either side. Portico also is able to help publishers be in compliance with many third-party community requirements. There's a number of initiatives out there now that require long-term preservation of content, particularly long-term preservation of content in a certified trustworthy digital repository. This includes the chorus requirement. Directory of Open Access Journals now has a requirement that titles should be preserved. Medline indexing for e-journals that are not going into PubMed need to be preserved in a third-party digital repository. And Plan S also has a preservation component to it. So trigger events. This at the end of the day is fundamentally why third-party preservation services exist, to ensure that libraries have access to content should it go away and no longer be hosted online. We do have trigger events. Content can trigger for a number of reasons. The largest scenario that we see is that publishers decide to no longer host the content, and sometimes they're migrating to new platforms and they've been hosting ceased titles and they're not going to migrate the ceased titles over. So at that point, they will make the decision to have Portico make the content available instead through a trigger event. We do end up triggering content because publishers go out of business and nobody takes over their titles. Normally there are some titles get picked up by other publishers, but there may be a few that don't get picked up, and then those end up being titles that Portico will provide access to. To date, we have triggered 119 titles. 117 of these are e-journals and 97 of these are OA. So for those OA titles, they are broadly available to anybody. And for the other, I think that's 30, the content is available only to Portico participating libraries. In addition to the 117 e-journals, we've triggered one reference work, the New Partridge Dictionary of American Slang, and an abstracts database, Site Critiques. In fall 2018, we had a very large collective trigger of 70 open access titles that were previously part of de Gruyter's Emerging Science Journals program. So this is an example of publishers deciding, to no longer host content. They had gone big into an OA program, changed how they handle OA content, and for the journals that weren't proceeding, rather than continue to host them, they pulled them down and had the content trigger through Portico. So what happens when content triggers at Portico? We work with where the publisher is involved and still operating. We work with them to ensure that all the content is in-house and ingested, and that we coordinate the time frame to make sure they're not pulling the content down until Portico is ready to make it available, and then we can have everything work out smoothly, so there's not a gap in time frame when libraries wouldn't have access. Content is opened up according to the agreement. So as I mentioned, if it was subscribed to or purchased content, the Portico participating libraries are the set of institutions that receive access. And for open access content, the content is broadly available. Linking vendors are notified so that they can update their databases to point to Portico. And then we also provide a metadata file to Crossref so that the DOIs are redirected to Portico. Perpetual access and post-cancellation access, as I mentioned, is an opt-in service. It does not cost an additional fee for publishers. It's part of what they get for the standard fee that they pay to Portico. However, they're not required to offer post-cancellation access. But if they do, that means that their former subscribers or purchasers are able to come to Portico at a time when they've stopped subscribing or getting access through the publisher's platform and make a claim to Portico, providing that they are Portico participants. This is a general overview of what happens when a library makes a post-cancellation access claim. They will make the claim and provide us with backup documentation showing that they actually did subscribe or purchase to the content. Portico then will go through a process of identifying the content, making sure we're complete, working with the publisher if we're not complete to make sure we have everything in place. And this involves contacting the publisher and letting them know that this request has been made. Publishers have 30 days to ask us questions, talk to the library, decide to resolve the claim themselves. At the end of 30 days, if we've gotten an okay from the publisher or we've gotten no response from the publisher, Portico will turn on access to the library. This is IP authenticated access to the institution. So that is basically the nuts and bolts of how Portico operates on a day-to-day basis. I just wanted to talk very briefly on our engagement in the community and some partnerships and projects that we're involved in. Portico is engaged within the digital preservation and scholarly publishing communities to ensure that we're contributing to sharing and learning from the efforts of others. The logos you see on the page are just a smattering of some of the organizations that we're involved with. We are one of the keepers in the Keepers Registry, which tracks the digital preservation status of e-journals across a number of digital repositories. A member of our staff is on the NDSA Standards Committee and the NISO Information Creation and Curation Committee. I am on the OASPA Board of Directors currently. We are on the Open Preservation Foundation Product Board. And we have a member of staff that's on the JAT steering committee. So we're really engaged in the community and committed to moving the dial forward in terms of digital publishing and digital scholarship. We've been working with National Libraries since 2013. In 2013, the UK mandated that e-content had to be part of the legal deposit program. So we started working with the British Library to assist them with that. We currently supply content for 27 publishers. We've been giving them content for over 8,000 journals, and more than 5.5 million articles have been delivered to date. So how this works is that we're able, because we migrate everything to a common metadata format before it's preserved in the Portico archive, we're able to export out to the British Library all of this content for 8,000 journals in a single format and package, which makes it very easy for them to then ingest it into their system, as opposed to getting individual formats from all of those publishers. So they are separately working with other publishers and taking it in the publisher format, but for these 27 publishers, they're just getting all of that in a single format. We've also been a longtime partner with the Dutch National Library. We have collaborated in the past to create digital preservation best practices. And back in 2010, we had begun storing an offline replica of the Portico archive at the KB. In 2018, we decided to take a leap forward, and we finalized an agreement for them to act as an online replica for the Portico archive. So as I mentioned when I was showing out where we're replicating, previous to this agreement with the KB, the second replica for Portico was all in the commercial cloud. Now the books and journals are going to the KB, and just the D collections are in the commercial cloud. We have also, in the last year, have joined a grant that the Mellon Foundation has given to NYU on preserving complex digital scholarship. A few years ago, Mellon heavily funded a number of initiatives in libraries and university presses to look into creating enhanced ebook, enhanced monographs, and different ways of presenting scholarship other than traditional books. And now, as the follow-up, they've funded this project to look into preserving this content because they understand the importance of making sure that all scholarship is available in the long term. So the grant is called Enhancing Services to Preserve New Forms of Scholarship, and there's a number of partners on this project. You can see here a variety of presses. Clock's Preservation Service, along with Portico, are working on this. So it's very exciting to be engaged with this, and we're learning a lot through the process, and really looking forward to being able to roll out something to handle this content. So the scope of the work is that the preservation institutions involved are going to test our capabilities for preserving these new forms of content. We're going to develop guidelines and best practices to identify materials and workflows that are most likely to lead to successful preservation of these different kinds of content. Some of the formats looked at are EPUB 3 with embedded content, self-contained HTML5, works that include data and software, that have versioning, user-generated content, external media and code, things that are difficult to do and that the current preservation systems aren't set up to handle. Solutions that we're looking at include things like emulation as a service and web capture. And finally, I just wanted to mention one last project that we're working on currently. It's called we're advancing knowledge and research through a collaborative text mining service. HathiTrust, JSTOR, and Portico are working together to see if we can present a viable text mining service to the community. We've done a lot of research with publishers, librarians, researchers to see what the needs are in the space and how text mining is currently being handled. We created a proof of concept last fall, and we're in the midst of conducting ongoing research to assess if there is really what the market need is for this service and what the scope of an operational service would be. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. And if at any time you have questions or need more information, please feel free to email me at the email address here.
Well, thanks very much for that, Steph. Obviously, it goes without saying, if you need to get in contact with either Stephanie or Ingenta, our contact details are actually on the screen. If anyone likewise is interested in any of the Ingenta content discovery and delivery platforms, such as the ones we actually mentioned earlier, the Ingenta Edify, Ingenta Connect Unity, Ingenta Connect, and Ingenta Open, please get in contact with us. Our email address is info@ingenta.com. You can also follow us on our Twitter handle, our Twitter feed at We Are Ingenta. And obviously, as a monthly webinar service, we produce these on a monthly basis. So please do follow us and keep in touch with us to see what our latest webinars will be about. If you want to meet us, please book an appointment, and we'll be glad to meet you. So if you've got any further questions, please get in contact with Ingenta on info@ingenta.com. Well, thank you very much, Stephanie, and to our listeners. We hope you enjoyed that, and we look forward to seeing you perhaps in the next month. Thank you very much.
Thank you.